Have you ever imagined yourself on stage, playing alongside your heroes, smashing away at the drums while the audience air drums to your incredible fills? I certainly have, but I'm a bit of a dreamer. But you say to yourself, you can't learn drums because you don't have the space, the money, it makes too much noise, or you just can't make that big commitment to buy the drum set. The truth is though, you can still get ahead of drummers that are learning with a kit, without a kit, by focusing on your technique on the practice pad. In this video, my plan is to show you why you should start playing drums now, whether you have a drum kit or not. Because honestly, it's more accessible than you think. Dave Grohl is the ultimate example of this, learning by playing along to Bad Brains records, setting up pillows in his house when he was young, and from that becoming one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. What a story that is. After learning drums now for coming up to 2 years, I found that there's 3 things that you can work on and learn where it doesn't matter whether you have a drum kit or not. It makes no difference. We'll talk about these a bit later in the video, but number 1 is stick control and technique. Number 2, hand and foot independence. And number 3, timing and groove. And obviously songs as well, but we need to get a bit more creative with those. I was recently listening to an episode of the Drum Podcast with Mike and Eddie. It's such a good podcast, you should check it out if you haven't already. But they had a question from the audience, and the question was, can I learn drums without a drum kit? They quite confidently said no, and they said that you would get bored and you would lose interest, which is a good point, but I don't agree because I don't have a drum kit and I'm still learning and I still find it very fun and very exciting. I think if our wish is to own a kit in the future, then we still have the hope and we still have the goal to progress and get excited about learning, especially if you're a beginner and you're just getting started. And honestly, I find it fun, so you might too. The difference with Mike and Eddie is that they're pro drummers and they're talking about really advanced level drums. The difference between hitting a pad and a drum kit is very different. To get the advanced techniques that you're going to need, they're going to need to be on a drum kit to get that technique dialed. Some Formula 1 drivers use simulators to practice when they can't get on the track, but they're never going to get that realistic, adrenaline-fueled reality of a live track day. Drums are essentially a pitchless instrument, so the rhythm and the groove is more important than which drums you're hitting. And that's one of the reasons why drums are so creative. There's something really exciting about the challenge of learning drums without a kit. And there's no other popular instrument that I know of that you can learn without the instrument itself. So you can practice anytime and anywhere. And that's what makes drums so special. Tapping along to songs on the train, learning notation from a book, all of these things you can do without actually owning a drum kit. But in my opinion, we do need some equipment to become a competent drummer. So for the focus of this video, I'm going to suggest that we have a drum practice pad and some sticks, which is something that all drummers use, whether you have a kit or not. Obviously the goal at some point is to move on to the kit. So if we can develop our skills on the pad, then when we move on to the kit, I think you'll be surprised at how proficient you can be. I'd recommend something like a Evans real fill pad, some 5A sticks, which are a bit of an all-rounder stick. I've had an Evans real fill from the beginning of my journey, and I love that practice pad. It feels like a tightly tuned snare drum, and it's really nice to play. Please support your local music shop, but if you're buzzing to get started, then jump on Amazon if you have to. Since I started learning guitar in 2001, I've always been a tapper to the annoyance of my family. I loved playing guitar, but the dream of owning a drum kit was real. And every time the drummer from our band went to the toilet, I'd make sure that I jumped on that kit to get a couple of minutes of playtime. But it just wasn't realistic in our situation to get a drum kit in the house. Now at age 33, I'm living in a flat in the city, and still there's no space, no flex to make noise, and still the dream is real. But the difference is this time I said, okay, let's just start. I said to myself, let's just get some sticks and a pad and see how we get on. And we'll book a rehearsal room when we want to actually jump onto that drum kit. But I'm a firm believer that without access to a kit, we can still be a drummer. And there's 3 super important things for us to focus on. And these, in my opinion, have the ability to get us ahead of other drummers that have kits by focusing down on our technique. And that's because without the noise, the setup time, the cost, the choosing the time to practice, and without annoying anyone, we can get solid technique. Because there's so many lessons on how to practice with a practice pad. I'm not going to go into how to do this, but I'm just going to talk about the 3 things that we want to look at if we're going to improve just using a practice pad. So let's go over the things that we can do. Stick control and technique. Rudiments are often overlooked by beginner drummers because they just focus on songs to begin with, which is absolutely fine. But Some of the positive comments that I got from my 1-year progress video were that I had started learning rudiments from the very beginning. It meant that when I got to more complex fills and grooves within these songs, I had more confidence and control within my hands to achieve that. There's a lot of people sort of wishing that when they started playing drums, they'd learnt rudiments at the very beginning as well. So without a kit, we're actually winning in this respect because we can focus on rudiments so much more easily. Learning accents and ghost notes are perfect on the pad, and there's no need for a drum kit for this, as most of these are focused on the snare anyway. Accents and ghost notes take time, and sometimes it's difficult to train your hands to play at different volumes, so taking that to the pad is a very important first step. A really good way to get started, and what I did as well, is I followed along to some of Alejandro Cifuentes' content on YouTube. He has some really good play along workouts for rudiments, and I definitely recommend checking those out when you get started. The second thing that we can do really well with just a pad and sticks is hand and foot independence. It's something, again, that takes a lot of time, and it's muscle memory, so it's something that we need to train and train over time. So taking it back to basics, using the pad, and even if you're just hitting your foot on the floor, you're training the different limbs to work independently. And again, it doesn't matter if you have a kit or not for this. The king of independence is LS DePario, and if you need some inspiration of just what's possible, then check out his content. He is unbelievable, and I'm sure you've seen it before. And lastly, timing and groove is another thing that we can learn just using a pad and sticks. There's loads of metronome apps you can get on your phone, and you can practice your rudiments or your grooves in time with a metronome, which will be really helpful when you move on to the kit or if you play in a band. Using this method, you can get really tight grooves and get really fluid with playing along to the metronome. We can learn note values and learn notation. One thing that I found really difficult at the beginning was understanding what fills and grooves that I could play along to a certain tempo. So playing with a metronome, I can now understand that if it's 60 or 120 BPM, I know what fills and grooves I can play at that speed. But if we move it up to 90, then I'm gonna struggle. I think I've recommended Rock School in every single video so far, so I'd recommend getting the Rock School Grade 1 or the debut book to give you an introduction to notation and learning songs with notation, or just YouTube the hell out of it. Obviously, learning songs on a pad isn't ideal, and it's one of the things that puts people off from not starting drums in the first place. But honestly, I find it really fun, and I use the sides of the pad and the different areas of the pad to suggest hitting different drums. You just have to use your imagination. If you're hitting a crash and you hit the side of the pad, it kind of works. But one of the advantages that you have when you're learning songs on the pad is that you listen more carefully to the music, and you're much less likely to miss anything in the mix. One thing that I would recommend is trying to get on a kit as much as possible, whether it's at school, rehearsal room, a friend's house, or even just a music shop. Here's an amazing quote from Josh Dunn from 21 Pilots. I love this quote. "I would lay in bed every night with my sticks and hit my knees trying to figure out what they were doing. Like, okay, now they're hitting the ride cymbal, and now it's the snare, and now it's the crash. I would dissect everything that I watched or listened to. Every day I'd walk into the local music store and play their electronic drums until one of the workers will be like, hey, we have people in here that actually want to buy stuff, so you've got to go." I did that for about a year, and that's essentially how I learned to play some basic beats. So even the pros are learning without a drum kit sometimes. It's just down to your situation, and we never have that perfect ideal situation like having drums in a studio that's always accessible at any time of day. With drums, we definitely have to compromise, and I'm still having fun learning on a pad, and going down to the rehearsal room once a week is still great, and I still feel like I'm progressing almost 2 years in now. I'd love to know what the biggest barriers are for you to pick up the sticks and learn drums without a drum kit. Try it out. What's the worst that can happen? And who knows, maybe one day you'll be on stage just like Josh Dunn. We can learn just about any groove that we want on just the practice pad, and it's not going to stop us from moving up through the grades. The only difficulty that you might run into is not practicing with your right foot on the bass drum. I've rectified this by getting a bass drum practice pad, because as much as we can nail the timing and the groove, the technique's going to be very different from hitting your foot on the floor to hitting it with a bass drum pedal. If you don't have the ability to get a drum practice pad or even some sticks, check out my previous video which shows you how you can tap on your legs and use pillows as well, like Dave Grohl did.